All right, hello everybody. This is my first video, and I'm going to explain what dichotomies are in dichotomology. This is something I've been working on for a long time, and it's going to be really hard for me to fully articulate everything right now, because this is the result of like a series of epiphanies I've had over the past few weeks. With most of them culminating on Wednesday, June 29th, 2024. And I'm going to go ahead and get into what I'm going to cover is what dichotomies are and how we come to understand what they are. And also what they aren't, because we have a wrong understanding of what dichotomies are. Okay, so dichotomology. Dichotomous theory delves into the complex interplay between opposing yet complementary forces in the universe. This theory examines how the left and right hemispheres of our brain shape perspectives in both apprehension, grasping things, understanding them, reducing them, making them simple, and comprehension, seeing the relationship, the expansiveness, and understanding things better. Underscoring the need for balancing the analytical and holistic thinking by integrating empirical science and religious intuition. Empiricism is more left brain thinking. It's specific, it's reductionist, and in its pure form, it's science. And we'll get into that later in another video. But all of this stuff is connected, so it's hard for me to talk about one specific thing at a time without bringing up other things. So let's see what's next. This is really hard for me because this has changed every way I think, and it's trying to articulate it, especially when the right brain is what came up with a lot of this stuff. Your left brain is used for articulating stuff, so being able to talk. I have to be able to basically speak through the small brain of my corpus callosum here, so forgive me. So dichotomous theory offers a comprehensive framework to navigate the duality of human cognition and reality. It advocates for a harmonious synthesis of true dichotomies to attain deeper truths about reality. The reason for there being a dialectic between these two is due to the structure of reality itself influencing how our brains need to work properly to understand the world. So when you're understanding the world through your left hemisphere, you're grasping things, you're rationalizing things, and you're simplifying them, and you're ignoring a lot of the aspects of your right brain, and your right brain's turning off a lot of the functionality of it. So it's not as expansive because your left brain's simplifying, your right brain's expanding. So it's like an infinite regress and an infinite expansion on one side. So that's what's happening in your mind when you're simplifying. But then you see the world, you perceive it, you can grasp it. So it helps you in that way. It's rationalizing the world with your left hemisphere is useful. So that's how you think of it. Left brain is useful, where the right brain actually sees the world. So purpose and meaning. So one side has the understanding and meaning, and one side has the ability to grasp the world. Okay, so insofar as someone aligns with one of these arguments without taking the other side into account is the degree to which they are wrong, or at least partially wrong. So they're right in that you can utilize the right hemisphere to understand the world and give it meaning, but the left hemisphere is what you're going to use to grasp it and give it purpose. And because there's just understanding something doesn't let you use it. So you can't use it unless you understand it. Okay. These two, they contradict each other, but yet prop each other up. So it's like a pulley system. It's like wrestling. That's what like religious individuals will say is wrestling with God. You're trying to find that middle ground between the two, and try to hold it in like a sort of homeostasis where it's in balance and equilibrium. So that's a lot of what all these ideas come to the conclusion of, is there's a balance somewhere and we need to find it. And that is what heaven is. Okay, so So we'll get into what a true dichotomy is, because a lot of this stuff I'm going to keep repeating a lot of what I've said, basically. Like, this is what a lot of this means. I can read the words directly, but you're not going to grasp the full concept and open your mind to it unless I draw the connections that are related to everything. So it may feel like I'm jumping around a lot, but okay. So a true dichotomy explained. Many ideas often exist on spectrums, so like hot and cold. Though they sometimes are perceived as binaries at their extremes, viewing them strictly as binaries can lead to the loss of nuance within that, resulting in a ideological rigidity and likely just a rationalization. For example, the concept of hot and cold, absolute zero or absolute cold equates to the absence of all heat, while absolute zero is impossible. The same is true for absolute hot. So there's a spectrum of what is possible in the universe that we can. I don't even know if this. Okay, there we go. So there's a spectrum of what is possible in the universe and what is impossible. So that spectrum at one end is cut off by the rationalization of that extreme. So in other words, we made up Planck temperature to understand where that extreme ends. But without understanding that, we wouldn't understand where it ends. So you have to know what isn't possible to know what's possible. So knowing that Planck temperature is impossible, we know what is possible, where our limit is. So it gives us limits in understanding the whole concept of hot and cold. And then the same is true for the other side. Absolute zero lets us understand the absolute limit of what's possible on the other side of the temperature scale. And somewhere in there is a good equilibrium for life to exist. And that's, we've already figured that out, that what that temperature is, but it's nowhere near absolute hot. It's more towards absolute cold. So it's not that what you're trying to do is find a perfect symmetrical balance between the two, but find the harmonious syncrasy along that spectrum somewhere in which we can thrive and survive. That would be what you would want to take from it. So the image represents hot and cold with the impossibility of each extreme, but they lie on the same dichotomy. So it's like if it was as close to absolute zero we can get, there's no way for that to be hot. So as far as we can get over there, there's no way for that to be hot because it's relative to anything. It wouldn't be hotter than it, so it couldn't be hot. It would just be cold. So it's impossible for the furthest cold thing to be hot. But then as soon as it's a relative thing, then you can have hot. So if you're at the far end of the spectrum and then there's one thing over from it, then there's such thing as hot. So the relativistic and subjective perspective is what gives the ability for something to be hot or to be cold, which is what we get into subjective experience of that relativistic thing, is how we understand this dichotomy. And we'll get into that later as well. So to subjectively understand a dichotomy, you must first understand its extremes. We do this through rationalization. So we understanding the extremes through rationalization, but we're subjectively understanding the dichotomy through our experience of it. So we experience that dichotomy, and then we can slowly rationalize what the extremes are, and then we can objectively measure it. So at some point, we're going to objectively measure it or like mathematically figure it out. And then we're like, oh, now we know the rationalized extremes, because those rationalized extremes don't actually exist in reality because they're impossible to achieve, but we at least know what they are. Okay. So there's an actual spectrum of empirical temperatures, so we must separate the subjective relative relationship with the objective dichotomy that exists. Okay, that's what I tried to explain there. Again, it's going to be really hard for me to articulate these ideas because I'm trying to think with my right and my left hemisphere at the same time and like find a cohesive understanding of what we're getting at. The rationalization of the extremes is from our left hemisphere, but our right hemisphere understands the fullness and the fullness of the spectrum, the dichotomy between the two and relationship of it. So the cold and hot, that subjective experience. Okay, so there's no such thing as the extremes only in rationality. In our Example, we show it's impossible to achieve absolute zero or Planck temperature, but we can create the rational social constructs, but they do not give us any bearing in reality. So they're still useful. They still give us understanding of what the dichotomy is. They're in effect unachievable, but can be pursued. So we can keep getting closer and closer to Planck temperature, closer to absolute zero, but we can achieve it. And there's an infinite barrier between the two that we can't because of the laws of physics. So in every dichotomy you can think of has these characteristics. So if it doesn't have these characteristics, you have what I would call a rationalized dichotomy. And we'll get into the definitions of all these things later as well. So these dichotomous ideas, in a way, find themselves work in two ways. They can compromise by forming a synthesis of ideas or reject each other and form a particular subjective conflict. So this concept, I don't even know, I shouldn't have it here, honestly. It's something that I'll go over later between when we take dichotomies and merge them together, we have, in order to apply them to our societies. Like if you take hot and cold and then the subjective experience of that hot and cold, you're going to want to account for it. Therefore, you're going to, it's going to match up with the dichotomy of material or energy. So hot and cold is another form of energy, but material energy, if you merge them, you get, okay, how can we use materials to affect hot and cold? How we get the material dichotomy. So if you can imagine infinite material or infinite matter or no matter, both are impossible. So how do we use this dichotomy in conjunction with this other true dichotomy of hot and cold to intersect and create us something that can account for this? And it's kind of a really weird way of thinking about it, but it's how we get to like all of our refrigeration products and all these other things, is because it's obviously through the scientific method, but our brain, our right brain, is making these connections through these dichotomies. So it's understanding the world through these dichotomies and feeding that to the left hemisphere to say, here's the problem I want you to deal with, and that's your problem. So you figure out how to deal with it. I just showed you what the connection is. Now you figure out how to solve that. So that's what our left hemisphere is doing. It's using science, where the right hemisphere is religion. It's like drawing the connections between everything, the relationship, and then boom, it sends it to our left hemisphere, and it's like, hey, solve this. Okay. So a lot of this is coming to me also. Like I haven't even written that part down. Like a lot of this comes to me as I think about it. But obviously I'm going to get a lot of questions on what these things mean as I go through them. And then also, like retroactively, I'll probably have to correct a lot of this stuff because I wrote 35 pages or 7,500 words in 5 days. So I'm going to have to go back and correct things. I may have misused terms, but that's all going to be your guys' left hemispheres correcting me, trying to find the specifics that are wrong with this, the details. Whereas if you take the whole concept, it's true. And your right brain will tell you that once you fully comprehend it and open yourself up. That's what religious individuals say, is like, I need to open myself up to God. I need to surrender to him. And that's the whole concept, is you need to let your left hemisphere ego surrender to your right hemisphere expansive knowledge and relationship with God. And obviously I'm using religious terms because I have nothing else to describe how to describe it other than that. But you can just say with reality itself, like you have a relationship no matter what you think or want to think or rationalize. You have a relationship with reality itself, and it's one of love and cooperation, and I'm going to get into that later as well. But okay, so along the dichotomy, there is a series of various temperatures that are also infinite and expansive. Okay, so if you take any point along the spectrum of temperature, you'll be able to find another temperature, like 2 points. I mean, you'll find an infinite number of temperatures between those 2 points as well. So there's infinite temperatures within the range of infinite, or in the range of the true dichotomy. So you can have an infinite number of temperatures, but the entire dichotomy itself is bound by reality. So you can never go past the limits of it, or even get to the limits, because they're rationalized and they're not true. So yeah, so you can keep finding infinite temperatures within the temperature variation. And obviously we're limited to that by the measurement tool that we use. So if we have a magnifying glass that can only ever get to, like we have a theoretical limit of what we can possibly see at the smallest level, well, there might be another piece or a smaller part that we can't see yet. Like I think we're down to quarks or in like the smallest thing that we can think of, but there's probably more parts down there that we can't see, that are underlying everything. We have no measuring tool that can see that far, and there might be a limit to that, and we're going to find it eventually. And then on the other hand, we have expansion. Like we can't even see the full universe. Like it's outside the bounds of our ability to see right now. But maybe there's a limit to that, how far we can see, which is sight is another or seeing light is another true dichotomy. It's like there's light everywhere. First of all, there's no way to have absence of light, and there's no way to have complete light. But in that, it makes it to where sight, which is a subjective dichotomy, you can see there's a limit to how far we can see, but also a limit to how short we can see. So that would be the magnifying glass, right? Like if we can only see smaller. And then the other opposite would be the expansive, how far we can see, how big we can see the world. And we haven't seen the full small world, and we haven't seen the full big world. So that's the left brain is like the small world, and the right brain is going off into expansive, the rest of the universe. Hope that made sense. I'm new to articulating some of these concepts, so bear with me if you can. Okay, dichotomies can be combined, interact with other dichotomies to create or synthesize and form the state of a form, and change the state of a form. I wish I went into forms before this, but like it's hard to lay this out in a cohesive, like one by one, because everything's connected. When you're connecting everything together, it's almost like a blur, like the Bible. It's not here's a beginning, here's the end. It's all this stuff is all connected, and it's what people have formulated over time with all the different like spiritual awakenings that have happened. All the people who have gone from like rationalistic left brain thinking over time, seen more examples of the world and drawn the connections, and then had that spiritual awakening with their right hemisphere to where they have the epiphanies, and the everything comes to them. They see the connections between it all. And this was what was revealed to me during my spiritual awakening, was these ideas of dichotomies. So I think I should get into rationalized dichotomies next. And you guys can pause it and read or whatever if you want to read the rest of it, and like if you can understand it yourself. But then I'll go back to perspectives of dichotomies. So rationalized dichotomies are states rather than dichotomies. So for example, if you have a light, you turn it off. It's not off or on. There's no such thing as that dichotomy or off or on. You can like rationalize it, but the true thing is that it changed from the state of emitting light to no longer emitting light, or not emitting light to emitting light. So in reality, there's not a true dichotomy right there. It's a rationalized dichotomy. It's like, okay, what's actually happening in reality is that it's changing states, but we can rationalize it with our left hemisphere to understand it better and easier and simplify it by saying the light is off or it's on. And in doing that, it gives us a true understanding of reality, but not the dichotomy of light itself, because it's impossible to have any area of space that has no light in it. You can go off in the vastness of space outside of our solar system. There will be light there. So light is everywhere, and so is dark. And it's just a gradient. So you cannot have absolute dark. You cannot have absolute light. There's no way. And when we try to get absolute light, guess what? We get a black hole. That's what you get. So you get a black hole at one end. On the other end, you get, it would be like space, just empty space, but it would still have light in it. So it would have energy, because energy is being permeated and displaced throughout the universe as it grows. So That's the two ends of that. Okay, so the perspective, that's the rationalization, and then so we can rationalize the dichotomies, and then there's a difference between that and rationalizing the extreme. So if we rationalize the extreme, that is that useful understanding of where the dichotomies end, because we have to understand where it ends. We have to understand one step past where it ends in order to understand where it ends. So like if we were testing, okay, how hot can it get? Can it get this hot? Either through mathematics, observation, whatever the case may be. Can it get hotter than this? And we keep going. And then all of a sudden we reach a limit. And we're like, okay, is this a limit of the universe, or is this a limit of our instruments? And if it's a limit of the universe, then we know this is the end of the true dichotomy. And then we can rationalize that extreme to be one step further than that, because in order to test, like to be like, okay, we can't get past this. Okay, then we mathematically check. Yes, this is the extreme because we understand what's not possible. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'll go back to perspectives. Okay, there's a subjective perspective of each dichotomy. And I actually have a lot of examples of true dichotomies I've already come up with, but the first three being like space, time, and energy and matter. Like space, time, energy, and matter are interchangeable. So those are the first three dichotomies. And then, or true dichotomies, sorry. Okay, so that gives you a perspective of what I'm talking about here. Excuse me. Okay, 21 minutes. Okay, I'll just explain the perspectives and then we'll be done for the day, for this video. Because I've explained a pretty good amount of what a dichotomy is. And I'll probably have to reformulate a lot of this whenever people start to understand it better. Because I've never heard these formulated this way. And I hope that this becomes a new perspective for people to become enlightened and or at least open up to that right hemispheric way of thinking, and they will have their spiritual awakening as well. So it's funny that I've never talked in a religious way in my whole life, but in thinking of this is what gave me these epiphanies and understanding and relationship between everything in the universe. And it may partially be due to age, because as you age, you get more understanding of reality, and you're more likely to have these spiritual awakenings because you see the connections. You have to see them and like get the knowledge before you can, which is what religion is supposed to be. It's supposed to be you collecting the relationship between everything, the knowledge of the relationship between everything, and then you have that spiritual awakening. And I think this is another addition to that, another thing to add for people to get from the scientific rational mind to the expansive relational aspect of the right hemisphere. And that's why I think right hemisphere, religion, left hemisphere, science, and also hedonistic pleasure. Everything you would associate with the devil is of the left hemisphere, but the left hemisphere is important. Do not pretend like it's not. Give the devil his due. And the right hemisphere should be in control. Okay. So now that I've stated that, and that was part of my epiphanies as well, I also like, Jordan Peterson and Ian McGilchrist. Those were the two, I think, biggest ones that opened my mind up this way. Because Jordan Peterson has a biblical lecture. I watched some of those. And then Ian McGilchrist showed me, like, he draws the relationship between like science and religion, and he tries to rectify them. And this is what I'm also trying to do, and something that I've been aiming towards truthfully with my heart. And it's something that this is the result of. So I'm really passionate about it. And it gave me a series of epiphanies and a spiritual awakening. So like, I hope this happens to other people when they understand this information fully. And I'm going to try my best to get everyone to understand this. So the subjective perspective of a dichotomy that's our perspective, our understanding, experience of that dichotomy. So like hot and cold, I'm experiencing right now. My hands are a little bit cold because I'm in the basement, but it's that subjective experience of it. And then there's this is the experience a subject has of the objective, and it should be relative now because it used to be contextual, but see, I'm working on this as I go. Subjective perspective of dichotomies, the experience that a subject has, so us, of the objective and relative perspective of the dichotomy. So objective is the physical empirical measurement of that dichotomy. So with space, it's a ruler with the tall short dichotomy would be one of the dichotomies here. So if something's tall, you can be infinitely tall, or you can't be infinitely tall, but infinitely tall gives us the rationalization of the absolute end of tallness, because we haven't found the end of the universe yet, or our limit of that. You can go on to infinity, but infinity is the limit. So it gives us the understanding of the true dichotomy there. And then infinitely small would be the opposite. And we've already kind of gone over that with the magnifying glass or the microscope analogy. Okay, so the objective measuring of that dichotomy, it's pretty straightforward. You're measuring it where it is in that context. So it's like, I am here in this specific context. I'm measuring the objective dichotomy within this context. And then relative is the perspective emphasis to properly orient yourself to fully understand the breadth of the dichotomy. So if the coldest cold I've experienced and the hottest hot I've experienced gives me the best possible understanding of what that dichotomy means in reality. And that is through subjective experience as well. So yes, it's a subjective thing and relational. So that's why I'm putting relative instead of contextual. And contextual more has to do with objective perspectives anyways. So relative perspective of dichotomy is how much of that dichotomy have you experienced? That gives you the full articulation and understanding of what's possible with that dichotomy, at least in terms of your right hemisphere. Because like if the world was never cold enough to have ice, we wouldn't even know what ice is. So having that relative perspective gives us that understanding of what ice is and what water can be, the different forms it takes. So relative perspective of dichotomies is important. Okay. So I think I should be done with this video now. We're almost at 30 minutes. I think that's a pretty good amount of time. And then next I'll go over the first 3 true dichotomies. It's relatively simple. You can even read it here if you want to pause it. And then we'll maybe get into evolution, we'll probably be able to get through all this and into rationalism and intuitionism, which is what I think are the perspectives of the left and right hemisphere. So we'll get into the human aspect of how this theory manifests. All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. And I hope you all become more enlightened as I flesh this out. Love you guys.